You won't be yourself anymore. You'll step into the life of a medieval peasant, an ordinary, nameless soul, with no shining armor, no stone castle to guard you. You live in a tiny, crumbling village, surrounded by pale, frozen fields. Your home is nothing but clay and straw, its roof low, the walls darkened with smoke, the smell of dampness seeping into every corner. Outside, the winter wind howls as if it could rip the roof away, and the darkness is so thick that even a candle trembles helplessly in its glow. You're so poor that the blanket around your shoulders is just a tattered scrap of cloth, more mockery than comfort on a freezing night. And your meal, only a rock-hard piece of bread and a cup of thin, watery beer that barely warms your belly. But you're not alone. Beside you is your family, your old mother, whispering stories with a trembling voice, your younger sibling, whimpering beneath the blanket, your father, staring at the flickering flame as if begging it not to die out. And that is your role tonight, a fragile life, pressed between hunger, cold, and invisible fears. Yet within this role, you'll experience everything from the numb shivers that crawl through your body to the faint hope carried in a lullaby from the dread of wandering spirits in the fields to the quiet miracle when ice melts and tender buds appear again. In other words, tonight, you're not just listening to a story, you're living one, the life of a medieval peasant through the longest, harshest winter. You wake in the middle of the night, not from a nightmare, but because the cold itself is biting into your skin like a silent thief. Your breath spills out as smoke, vanishing into the dark, while the wind slips through the straw roof, whistling softly, almost teasing. This kind of cold isn't like stepping out of an air-conditioned room. There's no switch to turn it off, no rescuer waiting to help. It presses in, quiet and relentless, drowning you in silence. Like the opening of a horror film, no ghost, no monster, just the weather itself, playing the perfect villain. You curl up, your torn blanket barely covering you, and suddenly the whole setting turns into a survival challenge. A modern person might think, come on, just put on another sweater, right? But warm clothes back then, sorry, they looked more like bargain bin props from a B-movie itchy wool, stiff burlap, sheepskin that was heavy and smelled awful, with nothing remotely close to comfort. So instead of sleeping peacefully, you feel like the star of a film called Who Will Shiver Until Morning? The clay house you lie in doesn't help much either. Dampness seeps into every breath. Cracks in the walls open up like free windows for the north wind to sneak through. No architect signed off on this design, only the clumsy patchwork of peasant hands. And honestly, if you were to rate it, it'd get 1 star on TripAdvisor, with a review note: no insulation, no amenities, mice included. You listen to the wheezing breaths of your family, and yes, the livestock too. That's right, you heard correctly. Cows, goats, even chickens crowding into the same room. Here, you don't need a fancy surround sound system for an immersive experience. You've got your father's snores, the children's whimpers, and the gurgling stomach of a cow. That shared body heat is the only fireplace you've got a kind of medieval Netflix and chill. Except the chill here is very, very literal. And then hunger joins the cast alongside the cold. Bread so hard it feels like chewing roof tiles. Gruel so thin it's as if someone rinsed the dishes and decided not to waste the water. You can't just walk away like in a movie. This is reality. A reality that gnaws at your stomach night after night. In the corner, a weak flame flickers. It's not bright enough to read by, but just enough to make the darkness a little less terrifying. People tell ghost stories or recite lines from the Bible just to distract themselves from their teeth chattering. This cold night feels like a film with no climax, no ending, just stretched on forever. And you know small survival tricks will appear, like drinking watered-down beer, chewing garlic, or burying yourself in warm ashes. Little plot twists to carry you through each dragging scene. But are those little tricks really enough to keep the cold from turning into sickness, or worse, into death? You barely close your eyes before another draft slips through a new crack, as if the whole house is whispering to you in a language made of ice. The clay walls around you aren't a fortress at all. They're more like thin, cracked skin, damp and musty, exhaling the smell of mold. You press your hand against the wall and feel the chill soaking straight through your palm, as if the frost outside is sending you a direct greeting into your flesh. In modern times, people brag about apartments with soundproofing, insulation, even heated floors. But here, you're stuck in a house that's open concept in the most literal sense. The wind comes and goes as it pleases, and the rats don't even need an invitation. If there had been a medieval real estate show, this place would have scored miserably. pros close to the fields, free moonlight, cons, everything else. You take a deep breath, the smell of damp earth mixing with rotting straw, burning your throat dry. The air is thick, like a movie theater that hasn't been cleaned in ages, and you keep waiting for the next scene to cut away. But no, this film has no breaks, no cuts, because the director here is winter itself, a cold, relentless director who never calls it a wrap. This clay house with its makeshift thatched roof wasn't built to shield you from the cold. It was built to fool you into thinking you had shelter at all. Every leak in the roof, every crack in the wall, they're all supporting actors in the scene. They make you believe you have a home, when in truth, you're just a character abandoned in the harshest of settings. And the audience, you can't help but feel both pity and annoyance at yourself. Why on earth did you agree to play this role? The creak of the wooden beams above groans like a suspicious soundtrack. You hear the wind howling in long, drawn-out notes, like a frozen choir. Every shiver running through your body is its own special effect, free of charge, courtesy of winter. You pull your legs in tight, feeling the hard, damp earth beneath the thin layer of straw, unyielding, cold, unforgiving. The long night turns into an avant-garde screening where the audience has no right to get up and leave. Every detail, every smell, every sound feels like proof of the no amenities included package that came with medieval survival. And in that shivering moment, a question, both ridiculous and heartbreaking, rises. Is this a home? Or just winter's trap disguised as shelter? Then, as you try to calm yourself, you realize your shabby clothing, ripped cloth, scratchy wool, smelly hides are stepping into the next role of this strange film. You tug the coarse wool up around your shoulders, and instantly a prickling itch races across your skin. This wool feels less like clothing and more like a retired horror movie, prop-heavy, scratchy, suspiciously close to torture disguised as warmth. Burlap, stiff as armor. Wearing it makes you feel like a walking cactus. And animal hide sounds fancy until you realize it's basically a musty old rug, reeking and rigid as plywood. Meanwhile, in the modern world, people slip into light down jackets or cozy hoodies, while you're stuck looking like an extra in fashion, victims of the Middle Ages. To be honest, medieval fashion didn't bother with charm or style. It was just a clumsy mashup of heavy and rough, with zero chance for that slow motion scene where your cloak swirls dramatically. Instead, you're the muttering character, itchy, freezing. Why am I even here? The stench of animal hide clings to your breath, mixing with the moldy dampness of the house, creating a kind of all-natural perfume no brand would ever dare to bottle. You shift around, the coarse fabric rasping and crackling like tension-building background music in a thriller. Every movement reminds you that instead of warmth, these layers are nothing more than monuments to poverty. They feel like a hidden villain always beside you, whispering, "You'll never escape the cold." With your arms folded tight against your chest, the rough fabric traps no warmth at all. It feels more like wrapping yourself in a crude wall. If someone were sitting in the audience watching, they'd probably smirk bitterly. Here's a scene where the costume has betrayed the character. Instead of protecting you, it only drags you deeper into the atmosphere of cold. You sigh, realizing that if you had to rely on these layers alone, the night would stretch on like an endless series with no finale. But then, as you listen to the sniffling and the steamy breaths of your family and the livestock beside them, you suddenly understand it's this crowded warmth that carries the story forward. You edge closer and realize you're not just lying among your family, but squeezed in with an entire mini barn. The breath of your parents and siblings mixes with the heat radiating off a cow slumped in the corner, a goat shifting restlessly, and even a few chickens clucking softly under the straw. If this were a movie, the scene would be both funny and uncomfortable. A sleepover party where no one bothered to check whether the guests were human or animal. You close your eyes, the sharp scent of animal fur, human sweat, and damp straw blending into one. A strange perfume, like something a set designer might deliberately add just to test the audience's patience. A modern viewer would cry out, "Gross, so unsanitary," but for you, right now, every warm breath is the last defense against the cold. And so, in this medieval survival film, it's the voiceless animals that end up playing the role of unexpected heroes. Your father's snores blend with the cow's heavy breathing, forming a strange kind of soundtrack. The goat suddenly sneezes, startling you, but then you laugh in despair, as if the screenwriter slipped in a moment of comic relief just to ease the tension. In truth, in this frozen scene, these everyday noises become small comforts, like a witty line of dialogue dropped in at just the right moment. You feel your body not quite as frozen as before, warmed by the mix of heat radiating from your family and the huddle of animals. Yet this warmth is anything but glamorous. It's filthy, cramped, like a low-budget shot that somehow still works. Viewers might grimace, but the character, you has no choice but to accept it. This is the only fireplace available on a winter night. Your eyelids grow heavy. The warmth wrapping around you makes you believe you might actually sleep. But then your stomach growls loudly, pulling you back into reality hunger, patiently waiting for its cue in the next act of this cold night film. Just as you begin to savor that fragile hint of warmth, your stomach rumbles again, drumming like the suspense score of a thriller. In the darkness, you fumble for the stale loaf of bread, and the instant your teeth bite down, you understand why people compare it to pebbles. Each crunch feels like a self-inflicted stunt, your teeth crackling, the bread mocking you with its stubborn hardness. If this were a movie scene, the audience would cover their eyes and cry out, "Don't do it! Save your teeth!" You try a sip of thin gruel, a sad, watery prop the crew must have rushed together, just a few lonely grains swimming in a gray broth. The taste is nothing but smoke and emptiness. Yet here, in the freezing dark, it earns its role as a valuable supporting character. You slurp it down, feeling like the protagonist of a survival story, scraping together just enough energy to push through the longest act of all the battle against your own empty belly. Here, hunger and cold aren't just two separate enemies. They're a villainous duo working in perfect sync. One gnaws at your gut, the other tears at your skin. They move together like a pair of antagonists in some grim TV series. One knocks you to your knees. The other drives a frozen blade straight into your chest. You're left shivering, hollow inside. And worst of all, you know there's no miracle coming to save you. The sounds in the clay house sharpen into something almost unbearable. Your stomach growls in rhythm, with the wind screaming through the thatched roof. A grotesque soundtrack. Every puff of white breath leaving your lips feels like a special effect. Proof of just how fragile life is. You can't help but think maybe winter itself, as the director is savoring this scene, stretching it out, testing your patience as both character and audience. You curl up, forcing your eyes shut. But just as you slip toward sleep, hunger jolts you awake again, like a jump scare that needs no ghost, and you realize this night will never be peaceful. All that remains is the faint flame in the corner, playing its part as the last bit of light, waiting for its cue in the next episode of this endless film. You turn toward that corner where the tiny flame flickers, dancing like a side character with too little screen time, yet stealing every glance. It's nothing like the roaring fireplaces of noble castles, just scraps of wood, smoldering weakly. Their glow barely enough to throw twisted shadows across the cracked walls. If this were a movie, that flame would be the budget special effect, keeping the audience from sinking into total blackness, while also unsettling them with its light that's neither warm nor trustworthy. You sit there, eyes locked on the dim yellow glow. The crackle of wood sounds like whispers, sometimes even like brittle bones snapping. You shiver, unsure if it's from the cold or from your imagination, because on winter nights, people tell ghost stories not to scare, but to soften fear by turning it into dialogue. And you, hearing the children's murmurs, your father reciting lines from the Bible, feel the whole room shift into a bizarre theater where the audience comforts each other with scraps of stories instead of popcorn. Smoke curls upward, clinging beneath the thatch, stinging your eyes. You rub them, and the world blurs, like a scene deliberately shot out of focus to emphasize exhaustion. In that moment, the fire itself seems to morph into faces, sometimes the gentle look of a saint, sometimes the mocking grin of something monstrous. The flame becomes a screen where your imagination plays reels of unedited film. You stretch your hand closer. The fragile heat reaches your fingertips, but no further. Your chest and back remain cold, your feet stiff as stone. You realize this flame is like an overpraised supporting role the audience hopes it will save the hero. But really, it only delays collapse for a moment. In that imbalance, you understand to survive this night. You'll need stranger survival tricks, details so small they seem absurd, yet capable of becoming the unexpected twists in winter's script. You edge closer to the fire, sifting through old life hacks passed down by grandparents. Modern people get YouTube videos titled 10 Winter Survival Tips with flashy thumbnails. In your medieval version, the tricks are desperate, almost comical. Drink watered-down beer instead of water, since rivers freeze and no one wants to chew ice. That weak beer won't get you drunk, but it fools your stomach into thinking, there's still something inside. Like a silly cameo in a movie, not glamorous, not heroic, but an unlikely lifesaver. Some say you can bury your hands in warm ashes to keep the feeling in your fingers. The idea plays out like slapstick. You imagine the audience watching you crouched over, hands shoved into a pile of soot, grimacing but sighing in relief as the numbness fades. Cheap props, but surprisingly effective. Then there's the trick of layering rags, an itchy wool tunic, a stiff burlap wrap, topped with a frozen hide, the final look making you seem like the lead character who stumbled out of a fairy tale costume rehearsal. Not stylish, but at least the wind's teeth can't bite as deep. Sometimes, someone chews on a clove of garlic, not to ward off vampires, but in the hope it will chase away the cold. The audience might chuckle at the odd logic, but for you, when everything else fails, garlic becomes a sharp little talisman burning in your throat. And you realize none of these hacks are romantic, none heroic. They're just tiny lines of dialogue scattered through winter's endless script, sometimes laughable, sometimes heartbreaking. You glance around and see everyone playing their own part. Mother piling straw over her legs, your brother clutching a chicken to his chest, your father blowing on his hands while mumbling a prayer. Each one has their own personal script for making it through the night. And you know these tricks are only the prologue, because sooner or later, the cold won't stay quiet. It will descend as illness, turning this house into the set of an unavoidable tragedy. You hear coughing from the corner, first scattered, then settling into a steady refrain. In this winter film, the cold begins to change roles from an invisible villain into a disease with a face. The sniffling, the children crying with runny noses, your father doubling over, clutching his chest. It all swells together into a haunting soundtrack. If the audience were watching, they'd know this is the tragic sequence, the part where the cold doesn't just make you shiver, but tears into the health of everyone you love. You look down at your hands, cracked and swollen at the joints, every movement creaking like an old wooden door. Emptiness stings sharper when you see your little sibling wheezing, each breath puffing like smoke, as if their lungs themselves had turned into chimneys for winter. The cold is no longer just scenery, it's the hidden killer. No doctors, no medicine, only prayers and a fragile hope that maybe, by morning, the sun will show mercy. In the dark, a thought comes if this were a long-running series. This would be the plot twist. The audience thought they were watching a survival story, but suddenly they've stumbled into a grim medical drama where death wears a cloak of white snow. Children could slip away in a single night, and even the groan might not rise when the rooster crows. You sit there in the clay-walled house, feeling the whole scene morph into a massive sick ward, where the patients are your family, your animals, all groaning in a frozen chorus. You wonder, is there any trick strong enough to push this back? Or is the cold itself the ruthless director, deciding who gets to survive the next episode? As that thought wedges itself into your mind, you lift your head and hear the wind raging outside. The entire village, the entire land is besieged in an invisible battle, where winter isn't just weather, but a real enemy tightening its grip on every roof. You sit trembling, listening to the storm no longer whisper through the straw, but hammer like an invisible army assaulting the village. Every thud of wind against the clay walls beats like war drums. You realize winter is no longer the backdrop. It has stepped fully onto the stage, playing the role of invisible foe director, soldier, and besieger all at once. The whole village is sealed under snow. The roads vanish beneath the heavy white, as if someone had erased them straight out of the script. You try to open the door, and the wind slaps your face like a cold-blooded villain. The audience would think, no monsters, no warriors. This alone is enough to make a war film. And they'd be right. You're in the middle of a siege without bloodshed, yet full of death. Inside, people and livestock huddle close, body heat the final weapon. Outside, the cold circles like a guard, stalking every breath. You feel like a soldier in battle. No armor, no sword, only a torn blanket for a shield, and a bowl of thin gruel for rations. This enemy doesn't need to roar. It only waits, patient, grinding you down until you collapse. You close your eyes and picture the whole village as a fortress under siege. No escape, no reinforcements. Children wail, elders moan, coughing mixes with snores. It's the chaotic noise of a battlefield. Winter doesn't strike once and retreat. It attacks by the hour, by the night, a war of attrition. And you understand, in this film, you're not the audience. You're the soldier holding the line. And then, within that scene, a dim light begins to edge its way in, like the enemy stepping back for a moment. You lift your head and see the sky pale and gray. The battle isn't over, but at least dawn dares to crack the door. A brief breath in the story, opening space for the next act. You open your eyes fully, realizing the space has changed. No more suffocating darkness swallowing everything. In its place, a pale light seeps through the cracks. You push yourself upright, and there it is, the whole village buried under white. Snow lies still, like the earth's enormous blanket, beautiful, yet terrifying in its cold purity. If this were film, the director has just shifted from haunting war sequence to a somber art shot, pure white, covering up the wounds of a long night. You inhale, the cold air filling your lungs, but this time it carries a strange gentleness. Outside, a few birds sing softly, their voices seeming not to care at all about human tragedy. In the silence, their song feels like the soundtrack of a transition scene, the kind a director inserts so the audience can finally breathe after a string of relentless shots. You sit still, feeling both fragile and resilient, as if one night has aged you years. The morning light doesn't warm you, yet it carries something else, the quiet proof that the night didn't devour everything. Your little sibling still clutches the chicken in sleep. Your father still snores, and even the cow exhales heavily, confirming that your family is still here. This crumbling clay house suddenly feels like a witness to a small victory surviving one night, even while winter still lurks outside. You look out, the sun weak as an oil lamp hung high above. But even that pale glow makes you wonder, is it this very harshness that forges endurance in you, in your family, in the whole village? It feels as if the film has just closed a chapter, but instead of the end, the screen shows only a lingering question mark. And you know, this is only the beginning of a winter saga, where each morning sets the stage for the next challenge. You sit at the doorway, watching the faint light stretch across the ground, still scarred with ice, and a sense of urgency stirs within you. Because winter never comes just once and leaves, it returns again and again, like a series renewed for multiple seasons. And you, the audience, are forced to learn how to prepare for the next episodes. So the whole village shifts into pre-production, laying straw, stacking wood, storing grain, salting meat. Everyone becomes a busy supporting actor, hands smeared with earth, faces stern with the weight of survival. You see straw piled high, golden mounds stacked tight like giant props waiting for the next scene. The sacks of grain are buried deep, a thin layer of dirt spread over them like makeup hiding survival's secret. Meat hangs from the rafters, smoke seeping into every fiber, turning it into a special effect preserved and flavored with the sharp tang of winter smoke. Everyone works with a tense energy, as if they know they're acting in a horror film that never reveals its release date. You roll up your sleeves too, dragging straw, breaking wood. Sweat beads on your forehead, only to be chilled instantly by the wind, leaving you caught between heat and cold. A dark comedy scene the audience wouldn't know whether to laugh at or pity. Children are tasked with gathering twigs, their eyes wide with excitement, not realizing all this effort is just buying them a chance to shiver less when snow buries the village again. The soundscape of the village swells the chop of blades, the rustle of straw, the cries of chickens. It's like a montage sequence, the music quickening, the cuts sharper, showing the whole community pushing together. And yet, beneath the bustle, a quiet worry lingers. Is this enough? Or will Winter's director throw in a twist no one's prepared for? You stand in the yard, clutching an armful of wood, chest heaving. In your mind, you see the coming days, the winter market opening, where wool, wood, and salt will be bartered back and forth. And you realize stocking the house is only one act. The next scenes will play out in the open market, the community stepping onto the shared stage. You picture the road to market, glazed with ice, yet crowded with footsteps. The whole village, after weeks of hoarding in silence, now spills into the winter fair, a survival exchange and a social stage all at once. You push through the crowd, hearing the raspy shouts of vendors mixing with breath turned to smoke, creating a soundtrack that's both lively and severe. People trade wool, wood, salt things that once seemed small, but now glitter more precious than gold. A handful of salt might buy a bundle of firewood, and a stiff sheepskin suddenly takes the lead role in negotiations. You see frost-bitten hands reaching out, clutching goods as if clutching life itself. The faint clink of silver coins rings here and there, but most of it is barter, a sack of grain for a wool tunic, a basket of dry wood for a slab of salted meat. The scene plays out like a stark documentary, where the director doesn't need dialogue, only the anxious eyes and wind-reddened faces of the people. You pass by the makeshift stalls and notice a cluster of children huddled together, their eyes locked on a hunk of meat dangling above them. It isn't just food, it's hope, a symbol that life can stretch on a few days longer. In contrast, you hear the coarse laughter of men who've managed to trade for weak beer. They pop it open right there, drinking with cracked voices, turning the market into a makeshift tavern. It's a detail that makes the audience half pity, half smile, even in the frost. People still search for warmth in the bitterest brew. The din crashes into your ears, shouts, calls, horses neighing, dogs barking, until the market becomes a vibrant ensemble scene. But beneath the noise, a quiet dread hums. Will today's trades be enough to outlast the winter? Or is this only a brief interlude of cheer before the plot plunges back into tragedy? You clutch the bundle you've managed to barter, your hands still stiff with cold. In your mind, the next scene is already framed, the whole community gathering in the church, searching for faith and for warmth of spirit. When material stores will never truly be enough, you step inside, wooden shoes clacking on the frozen stone floor, and instantly feel a different kind of air. It's still cold, still drafty through the narrow cracks, but something in you softens. The sound of prayer rises, not grand like a polished choir in an epic film, but trembling, raspy, breaking off in places. And yet, it's that very imperfection that makes the moment moving people, besieged by winter, still forcing themselves to sing as if to drown out the wind. You look around and see hundreds of breaths rising as mist, weaving together into a foggy veil inside the chapel. Small candles flicker, their weak but defiant flames standing tall, as if each tiny light were fighting back against the vast darkness. If this were film, the church would be the counterpoint set outside. Winter's battlefield. Inside, a fortress of spirit. You hear the priest's steady voice reciting scripture, like a narrator guiding the audience through each chapter of hardship. The smell of incense mingles with damp wool, rotting wood, and candle smoke, an aroma that belongs to medieval winter. It isn't pleasant, it isn't refined, but it binds you to a community. Beside you, an old woman clutches her rosary, lips whispering, eyes cloudy, yet full of trust. A child rests against its mother's arm, dozing off amid the hymns, a quiet shot the director inserts to remind everyone that faith can be a blanket, wrapping both body and soul. You close your eyes, letting the prayers carry you away. In that moment, you no longer feel the cold, nor the hunger. You feel only a fragile faith, just strong enough to hold people through the long winter night. And you know, after these whispered prayers, the village will seek to forget the cold with loud festivals, because every story needs its reversal. So the audience isn't drowned too deep in despair. The sound of drums rises from the square, urgent, and strangely warm, like someone swapped the film's soundtrack from tragedy to musical. The whole village pours out, cheeks flushed red from the frost, but mouths stretched in bright smiles. They raise mugs of watery beer, sing, dance, turning winter into a glittering stage, even if the props are just bonfires and rough wooden instruments. You're swept along too, feet stamping rhythm on frozen ground, as though you've slipped straight from a bleak scene into an unexpected musical number. Fiddles and flutes ring out, imperfect, but bursting with enthusiasm. The elders clap along. Children dart in circles around the fire, their faces glowing red in the flames, like frames of slow-motion film. You catch the smell of meat roasting on skewers, smoke curling into your hair, filling the air with something both chaotic and comforting. Here, the cold is temporarily pushed back like a villain shoved off screen to make room for a sudden burst of joy. You lift your mug, sip the bland beer, a taste no one would praise on any ordinary day. But right now, it's like champagne for the poor, a thin liquid that somehow stirs warmth back into your veins. Someone sings off key. The crowd bursts into laughter, and even the audience feels relieved. Yes, even in the harshest days, people still write in their own comedy to balance the script. You spin with the music, feet slipping lightly on the snow. And suddenly, it strikes you. Winter is still here. The cold remains. But this moment proves the human spirit knows how to bend the storyline. No one can erase the frost, but they can turn it into the backdrop for a dance. And as the bonfire dwindles, you sense the darkness waiting outside. Again, the darkness of superstition, of whispered tales of witches and demons ready to flood the space once the festival fades. You return from the feast, the taste of beer still lingering, laughter echoing faintly in your ears. When the night falls heavy, like a thick curtain, and in that night, people begin whispering other stories, no more songs, but chilling rumors. The cold is no longer just nature's bite. It becomes a sign of devils and witches circling the village. You huddle close, listening as someone mutters. When the wind howls through the chimney, that's the devil whispering. The audience might chuckle at the superstition, but in this scene, even that laughter freezes. The candle sputters, shadows on the wall dancing into strange shapes. Children hold their breath. Adults glance at each other with eyes reflecting a fear they cannot name. Winter's long, endless dark swells imagination like a cheap special effect. turning the wind into footsteps, the shadows into cackling witches. You breathe in the smell of candle smoke tangled with damp wool, as if the room itself were morphing into the set of a horror film. They say some have seen dark figures slipping by the forest's edge when the moon hides behind clouds. Some believe witches make the frost harsher, children sicker, harvests fail. That belief spreads fast. Like a collective script, everyone suddenly performs. You too feel yourself drawn in, though reason whispers, this is just cold making people weaker. But deep down, you still shiver, because in film, it's often the rational character who gets swallowed by the darkness first. You pull the ragged blanket up to your neck, heart racing with every gust of wind at the door. No one speaks, but everyone knows the night will be long. And then, as the howl fades into the distant cry of forest wolves, you realize winter doesn't just kill with cold, it kills with fear planted deep in the mind. You've barely closed your eyes after the whispers of witches when another sound rips through the dark, a long, dragging howl rising from the deep woods. It's heavier than the wind, sharper, like the trumpet of an unseen army hidden in the shadows. You jolt upright, heart pounding. The wolves, the one sound every medieval villager knows, carry a message as clear as it is merciless. We're here, waiting for you at your weakest. The clay house trembles in bursts, whether from the storm or from imagination. Run wild. Children burrow deeper into their mother's arms. Your father rises, gripping a wooden staff like a clumsy sword. The audience would recognize this as the climax, the director ratcheting heartbeats higher with sound off-screen. And indeed, the howls echo from every direction, a chilling surround effect nature provides for free. You inhale, the damp rot of straw thick in your lungs, but now laced with something sharper, the invisible scent of fear, the kind humans exhale when they know they're no longer the predators. You murmur prayers, but each word dissolves under the next wave of howls. Closer now, pressing in. If cold is the unseen villain, then wolves are its reinforcements, their eyes glowing in your imagination, like dozens of green flames circling the house. From the stable comes a scream, the horses, panicked, hooves pounding the ground like frantic drums, a warning from a side character that danger is here. You understand the wolves threaten not just people, but livestock, the family's lifeline. In this script, losing a cow would be no different than losing an entire storehouse of food. The audience would see the tragedy double, not only the frost, but beasts of the wild, as if the director refuses to grant the main character even a single moment's rest. You tremble, clutching the blanket tight, listening to the wolves' cries echo through the night. Panic has already seeped into every corner of the house. And yet, you imagine, while the whole village huddles in fear at the sound of wolves, another story is unfolding inside the Lord's castle, painted in an entirely different tone. Thick stone walls, narrow windows, and most importantly, a roaring fireplace that burns all night. You picture them gathered around the flames, cups of strong wine in hand, draped in soft, perfumed furs. If your life plays like a tense survival thriller, theirs unfolds like a slow, warm, upper-class drama. While you and the villagers still shiver with the wind and the wolves outside, the castle tells winter in another language. There, the thick walls keep out the storm, and the fire paints warmth across the skin like an obvious privilege. They wear furs that are carefully treated, soft, clean, nothing like the reeking, stiff hides you've endured. For them, winter isn't an enemy. It's just a backdrop against which to discuss land, marriages, or to raise another toast of heavy wine. Think about it. It's almost laughable the same winter, yet two completely different scripts. For peasants, it's a war of attrition, fought meal by meal, fire by fire. For nobles, it's a season to complain that the wine isn't as fine as last year. If a critic were watching from outside, they'd call it too obvious a contrast on one side, a survival thriller on the other, a lavish period piece. Even the smells diverge. Castle air thick with wood smoke from the hearth, herbs rubbed into roasting meat, the sharp sweetness of red wine, all of it enough to make you forget the frozen world outside. And you, hearing of such flavors, can only laugh bitterly. This luxury doesn't erase winter, but it transforms it into a memorable experience, reserved for the lucky few. And perhaps the cruelest irony is this: the nobles fear winter too, but in an entirely different way. Not the fear of hunger or frost, but the fear of interrupted feasts, of banquets with fewer delicacies, of hunting trips spoiled by snow. Those fears, compared to the shivering outside, feel like comic relief lines slipped into a tragedy. You sit imagining, asking yourself, maybe winter isn't only here to test endurance, but to reveal the gulf between people living in the same time. And as that thought lingers, Your ears catch word of another place, a winter monastery, where warmth isn't found in fire, but in the steady rhythm of prayer echoing through the dark. You step inside the monastery, its stone walls holding the chill longer than the air outside. Yet no one complains. The monks, wrapped in coarse robes, sit in rows, lips moving in low chants. Their breath clouds into smoke, mixing with the cadence of prayer, forming a soundtrack somber but steady. Here, the hearth is not the center, faith is. Winter isn't seen as an enemy, but as a trial of the spirit. You walk through the corridor, hearing the scratch of quills on parchment. Some monks continue copying manuscripts, fingers trembling, but letters even. Outside, people wrestle with food and fire, while here, life endures through ink, through scripture, through discipline. You almost laugh bitterly, even in the frost. They stay productive, not for coin, but to keep knowledge from vanishing. The scent of brewing beer lingers everywhere thicker, warmer than the watery swill of the village market. The monastery stockpiles beer and bread, not for feasts, but to ensure brothers survive the season. It is a kind of luxury compared to the peasants, yet also proof of collective discipline. There's no raucous laughter here, only quiet. But it is precisely that quiet that hardens into strength against the cold. You look at the monks' faces, pale, hollow-eyed, yet calm. They show no sharp emotion, as if they've signed a contract to play the role of the steady ones in the blizzard. Inside you stirs a mix of admiration and doubt. Is this calmness the fruit of true faith, or just a cloak hiding their fear? When you return to the village, the air has changed. The granaries are empty, salt jars scraped clean, the meat hanging in the rafters, nothing but leathery scraps. The cold still lurks, but now it has an ally hunger. The two work together like a seasoned acting duo, trading lines as they torment each soul. Your stomach growls, but there's nothing to feed it, just a strip of bark to chew for distraction, or bones boiled to exhaustion without giving up broth. You stare into the bowl before you, thin soup that tastes only of smoke, and feel the same sinking dread as an audience who realizes the darkest climax is about to begin. In the clay house, children cry, the elderly groan, coughs rattle one after another. You see your whole family thinning, faces gaunt, eyes dulled. Winter is no longer a metaphor. it steps forward plainly, a killer in the flesh. Anyone watching would know this isn't the part of the film meant to entertain, but the part meant to silence the theater, forcing them to reflect on life's fragility. Hunger has a strange smell. It's not as obvious as meat or smoke, but it seeps into the air, leaving your mouth bitter, your head light. People whisper about deaths in the neighboring village, families vanishing quietly. You realize the cold isn't the most frightening thing anymore. The thought that grips your chest is sharper by morning. Will everyone still be here to wake? And yet, even in the darkness, people find a way to hold on to a bit of light. Someone begins to hum a hymn faint, fragile, but steady, like a reminder that faith hasn't been extinguished. Just when hunger and frost have drained the village dry, Christmas arrives. No one has anything to spare for a feast, but still they gather, wrapped in torn cloaks, carrying even their rasping coughs with them. You step into the church, where a few flickering candles glow. There is no lavish banquet, only hard bread and a few sips of thin beer. Yet these meager offerings are cherished like treasures. In this poverty, the true gift is simply the presence of one another. The hymn grows louder, halting at first, then stronger. You lift your eyes to the smoke-stained ceiling and see weary, hollow faces. But in each one glimmers a strange light. They have no strength left to dance, no breath for laughter. Yet every verse is a declaration. We are still here. We are still alive through the long night. If the film so far has been nothing but bleakness, this is the quiet insert that carries immense weight. The scene where the audience exhales and remembers that even in despair, hope flickers. The smell of candle wax, damp cloaks, and burnt bread weaves into a strange fragrance, poor but warm. You listen to the whispers of children, hear their giggles as they're handed a small piece of bread. Even in hunger and frost, children still find joy, and that is what transforms this moment into a quiet, profoundly human scene. You sit there, hands frozen, stomach empty, but your heart strangely warm, not from the hearth or the beer, but from something else entirely, the strength of faith and of community. You thought you'd grown used to the cold inside your clay-walled home, but then war arrives, and winter becomes a double-edged enemy. You're called to the battlefield in the dead of winter, strapped into armor that hugs you like a coffin of steel ice. Each step, the metal scrapes your skin, so cold it feels like you're carrying the entire season on your shoulders. Instead of warmth, the armor becomes a walking freezer, and you the meat inside. And in that moment, you can't help but think, if some critic were rating war costumes, this one would rank as the worst design of all time. Across the snow-covered field, soldiers' boots sink deep, leaving messy scars in the white like smeared ink on a manuscript. The blare of horns mixes with the hiss of the wind, blurring orders into nature's cruel mockery. You grip your sword, but your hands are numb, your fingers refusing command. The blade feels twice as heavy, not from steel, but from the frost seeping into your bones. Any audience would see this is no heroic sequence, but a pitch-black comedy, soldiers shivering, weapons clattering, surrender tempting before a single blow lands, all because of the cold. You glance around and see comrades coughing violently, faces blued, eyes sunken. Some collapse, not from arrows, but because their lungs have frozen with every breath. War is brutal enough, but when winter takes the stage, it turns into a harsher game, where death doesn't need swords to choose its victims, and you realize the frost is fairer than the battlefield. It doesn't care who wins or loses. It strikes everyone. In your mind, a strange question echoes. Does history ever record whether an army lost to swords and spears, or simply to winter itself? And while that thought still lingers, another order cuts through. You must stand night watch outside the walls. You plant your feet on the watchtower, the wind slashing your face in waves, sharp as invisible blades. Your whole body curls inward beneath the frozen armor, stiff enough to make you feel like a statue of iron set atop the fortress. Your hand trembles around the shaft of the spear, not from fear of an enemy, but from blood turning to ice. This is no longer guard duty. It's a silent duel between human flesh and the frozen night. Every sound outside magnifies tenfold. The wind moans like a long howl. A breaking branch echoes like footsteps creeping closer. You strain your ears, your eyes wide, then let out a bitter laugh inside the deadliest enemy isn't out there. It's your own imagination, sharpened by the cold. A night guard doesn't only fight shadows, but also the tremors of his own body, a scene any critic would mark as the most tragic supporting role in this whole winter epic. You draw a deep breath, the raw air burning down your throat, stabbing your chest. Each exhale drifts away in smoke, looking like pieces of your life dissolving into the dark. In the distance, faint firelight glimmers from village homes, blurred like illusions. They don't warm you, they only sharpen your longing, like an audience wishing they could skip this scene straight to dawn. Your eyelids grow heavy, your body limp, but a horn sounds faintly in the distance, jolting your heart. You clutch the spear tighter, whispering to yourself, "Stay awake, stand firm." But you know even resilience has limits, and the next scene, when it comes, will be crueler still. You step into the shuttered house, and at once the air feels heavier than stone. The smoke, the damp, the charred scent of half-burned herbs all mingle into a suffocating haze that scorches your throat with the very first breath. But worse than all of that is the faint odor of death. It takes only a whiff for you to know sickness has arrived here. Hand in hand with the cold, tonight, this house is no shelter at all, but a dim trap where every breath might be the last. A racking cough breaks out, dragging on until it shreds into a rasp. Each cough falls like an axe, striking not only the patient's chest, but the spirit of the entire household. In the dark, you see wide, frightened eyes glowing faintly in pale faces. No one dares touch another, each afraid of becoming the next victim. Yet, in cruel irony, they're still forced to huddle close for warmth. The audience, watching, would shiver at the sight, life and death pressed so close, and still people cling to each other, instinct stronger than fear. You curl in on yourself, feeling the cold not just in your skin, but piercing into your mind. The plague has made winter clever. It doesn't only make people shiver, it weakens them, sapping away the strength to resist. You look at the child in its mother's arms, breathing in stuttered gasps, eyes half closed, and in that instant, you know you're inside a scene no one would ever choose to watch. This is no longer survival. It's a raw tragedy, where winter and disease shake hands and laugh. You want to close your eyes, to slip away, but the wheezing, the groans keep cutting through, forcing you to face it. And you realize out there, beyond these clay walls and straw roof, are others, without even this much wanderers adrift in the frost, with no house, no fire. You glance outside, where the darkness devours the snow-covered road, and suddenly think of those without any clay hut to crawl into. The wanderers, they are the most pitiful side characters of winter, the ones with no props, no stage, only the cold itself as their companion. You picture a thin figure wrapped in rags, feet pressing directly into frozen ground, each step sounding like wood snapping, no blanket, no fire, no animals to huddle against. They live in a frame so cruel that any audience would turn away, shaking their heads, too merciless. They come to the village edge, hoping for scraps, but the villagers are already spent. Every glance exchanged carries both pity and defense, because everyone knows to give one more piece of bread is to cut away at your family's fragile chance of survival. And so the wanderers become ghosts drifting beyond the gates, still alive, yet erased from the shared story. A cruel cutting of roles by winter's director. You shiver at the thought inside your house. Your suffering feels immense. But out there, those souls endure worse. When the wind whips through your straw roof and chills you, for them, that same wind is a blade against bare skin. When you have even a faint fire to watch, they face only solid darkness and the fear of predators. Anyone watching would see the injustice clear as day the same winter, but its cruelty never distributed evenly. You sigh, telling yourself perhaps they are the truest proof that winter is not just weather, but a test of morality. And from those fading silhouettes, your thoughts leap to another kind of journey, a pilgrimage, where people do not wander aimlessly, but step boldly into the storm, treating the cold as a spiritual trial. You hear stories of those who still set out in snowstorms, the pilgrims. They do not choose to stay, nor do they have castles for shelter. They walk toward holy ground, believing that faith can warm where fire cannot. You picture their bare feet wrapped in rags, pressing into deep snow, leaving red stains like lines of script written directly across the earth. From afar, the whole procession looks like a string of trembling dots stretching across the endless white. Each step is both desperation and declaration. They sing cracked hymns, voices ragged, trying to drown out the wind. Some clutch small crosses, others just grip cloth sacks, holding nothing more than a crust of bread. You see, even with lips blue from cold, they still manage faint smiles at one another, as if reminding themselves that the destination matters more than the suffering now. This is no survival scene anymore, but a spiritual ordeal, one where the audience cannot decide whether to pity them or admire them. You can almost smell it in your mind, the resinous tang of pine, pitch, burning from their flimsy torches, the wind slicing through their fragile chorus. Some stumble, collapsing into the snow, only to be pulled back to their feet. Others never rise again, their bodies swallowed overnight beneath white drifts. The march goes on, leaving behind instant gravestones carved by the storm. Any critic would sigh too cruel a scene, and yet unbearably beautiful. You huddle in your own home, imagining it, and wonder, is faith really that strong? Is walking into the ice madness? Or is it a power you've never touched? And as you drift in that thought, you remember not everyone braves winter for faith. Some travel simply to find a bed, a crowded room, a chance to share a blanket and breath with strangers inside a damp inn. You step into a winter inn, and at once the air is thick with human breath. The space is cramped, the ceiling low, the wooden walls split with cracks, yet it overflows with travelers, a lost merchant, an exhausted pilgrim, a wanderer begging shelter. You lie down in a corner and immediately feel the warmth of the body next to you, not the tender kind, but a damp, heavy heat, rank with odor, leaving you both grateful and nauseated. In the dark, dozens of breaths fuse together, like a living orchestra where every instrument is a pair of lungs. Snores overlap with coughing. Weary groans mix with the clatter of chattering teeth. You tug at the thin blanket passed to you, so short and damp, it feels like an old rag repurposed as a quilt. Any audience watching would wince and chuckle. Humans who quarrel about everything else are forced by winter's grip to share one giant bed. You smell wet shoes, greasy hair, the sour tang of food long gone stale. And yet, hidden in the stench is something warmer, the smell of survival. Paradoxical as it is, in this foul-smelling room, you feel safer than out in the blizzard, like a low-budget scene, stripped of glamour, but still effective enough that the viewers can't deny it works. You close your eyes, trying to coax yourself into sleep. But in this cramped space, rest feels like a gamble if luck leans your way. You find a position that fits. If not, someone's elbow digs into your ribs all night. And in that half-dreaming haze, your thoughts wander to those who don't stop at inns, but keep rolling on through the winter, the merchants hauling their goods, pressed into journeys where the cold itself turns into an invisible thief. You picture the road they must travel, wheels grinding over ice, cracking like warning shots. One wrong slip, and their stacked cargo topples into the snow, wiping out a whole season's fortune. Carts piled with salt, wool, herbs, all the things that keep people alive, suddenly as fragile as a bet placed against fate. The scene plays like a risky contract, with winter itself as the cunning partner, always scheming to swallow the investment whole. The horses pull and shiver, breath steaming, hooves skidding on glassy paths. Each shrill neigh rings like a cry for help. The merchant, wrapped tight in his cloak, eyes red from wind, hands frozen stiff around the reins. No audience would see romance here. This is the rawest reality a single storm can turn the whole journey tragic, transforming goods into nothing more than soggy, useless scraps. You hear stories of those who lost everything in a day, wagons tipped into ditches, families left to beg after the ruin. Some scrape through, but their cargo, ruined, salt melted into mud, wool molding unsellable. Here the cold doesn't only kill, it steals livelihoods, an invisible thief that never stands trial. A critic might mutter bitterly, "This is the worst commercial flop in history." You shiver at the thought. Strange, isn't it, that even in such cruelty, merchants still set out, perhaps for profit, perhaps for duty, or simply because there was no other choice. And you realize, if the merchants are battered this hard by winter, then those even weaker the prisoners with no freedom. No hearth must endure nights far harsher still. You picture yourself locked inside a stone cell in the heart of winter, 4 damp walls, an iron door frozen stiff, no fire in sight. Here the cold is no longer outside the gate. It's your cellmate, clinging to every inch of your skin. Your breath clouds the air, but instead of fading, it lingers as a thin mist, coating the already heavy atmosphere. Each time you touch the bars, it feels as if your flesh fuses to the ice, stinging so sharply, it's like being peeled raw. In the cell, there are no blankets, only the ragged breath of other wretches crammed beside you. One coughs until he chokes, another shivers uncontrollably, another gasps from hunger. The whole chamber hums with a grotesque harmony, half survival symphony, half death's approaching chorus. A commentator might mutter bitterly, "Here, winter is the true jailer." You sniff, catching the mix of mildew, cold sweat, and despair. It's acrid, sinking deep into your lungs like an invisible poison. Whenever someone collapses, no one dares approach, afraid of catching the chill of death itself. And then darkness swallows everything, leaving silence heavier than any chain. You lean against the wall, eyes wide in the dark, and wonder, are those who left their villages to escape the frost faring any better? At least they have the freedom to walk, while here you can only count the hours, each one marked by the hiss of wind through the cracks. And so the story drags you onward to the next scene, the migrants forced by cold to abandon their homes in search of warmth elsewhere. You picture the endless road stretching before those driven out by frost. They don't leave because they want to, but because cracked clay walls can no longer shield them. One leads a cow, another carries a child, hands clutching the last scraps of belongings. Breath turns to smoke, weaving together until the whole procession looks like a gray cloud dragging across the snow. From afar, they resemble a line of characters pushed off stage, stripped of their place in the script of their homeland. You hear a child's wail, a parent's trembling voice trying to soothe them. Their baggage holds nothing but scraps of dry bread and the fragile hope that somewhere ahead might be warmer. But everyone knows the road may be harsher than staying behind. Some fall mid-journey, without a grave, covered only by snow's cold blanket. And so winter becomes the merciless editor, cutting scenes away and leaving gaps no one can fill. The smell of hunger and fear clings to every step. A mother presses a hard crust into her child's hand, just enough to quiet the cries for a moment. A father wheezes, shoulders shaking, but still pushes forward, knowing that to stop is to die. A critic, watching, might say, this is not just migration. It is a test to see how much humans can bear when both nature and fate turn their backs. Your throat tightens, because while some still have the choice to stay, huddled by a fire, these people have no choice left. Forced to abandon their village, exile becomes their final gamble. And then, as every story demands, a kind of ending reveals itself when the cold night turns into a shared trial, not divided by who stays or goes, who is rich or poor, because winter, in the end, is the harshest director, weighing every human on the same scale of endurance. You realize that, after all these fragmented scenes of winter, from clay huts, cold churches, disciplined monasteries, to opulent castles and weary footsteps of exile, there's an invisible thread tying them together, the cold night. It is like a great common stage, where everyone is called by name, whether peasant, noble, monk, or wanderer. Every breath of smoke is a testimony that humans are struggling to prove they can keep moving forward. If any critic were scoring, they would say, "This is the grand ensemble scene, where every character is tested in fire at once. You see the injustice plainly. Some sit by roaring hearths, while others curl frozen on the road. Some clutch cups of strong wine, while others suck on chunks of ice to trick their hunger. And yet, strangely, all are besieged by the same enemy, winter, in its ruthless way, has turned the world into one vast theater where the only props are wind, snow, and shadow. And the script always circles back to life and death. In your mind, the sounds replay the hacking coughs, the trembling hymns, the wolves' howls, the clatter of lost hooves, the wails of hungry children, all of it tangled together, forming a score both painful and honest. It isn't beautiful, it isn't staged, but the chaos is what makes the trial real. No one leaves this act without scars. You breathe out, your warmth as fragile as a dying ember, yet enough to whisper the name of tomorrow. And you realize this cold night will return, year after year, like an endless episode. Humans, though small, are forced into the lead roll, and it is in daring to endure, daring to sing through the frost, daring to share even a crust of bread, that you see this shared ordeal, as cruel as it is, reminds us how deeply we need one another. You curl beneath your torn blanket, listening to the wind outside howl like an unseen beast circling for prey. In the thick dark, your child's mind conjures not only the cold, but strange shapes, shadows stretching into long fingers, the creak of wood becoming ghostly footsteps. The adults laugh it off, saying it's only superstition, but to hush you, to keep you still. They tell ghost stories of their own, and so your fear is both soothed and fed. A game without end, played out every night. You hear your younger sibling startle awake with a scream, then bury their face in your mother's chest. In that darkness, every quick breath of a child pounds like drum beats, tightening the night even more. Any critic watching would admit Winter's director is skilled. He doesn't need real monsters, just shadows and the wind, enough to turn a child's imagination into a living horror scene. The musty smell of the blanket, mixed with the faint smoke of a dying fire, does nothing to comfort you. Instead, It makes the whole room feel possessed by spirits. You squeeze your eyes shut, but every time you drift off, you picture a pale face peering out from a corner. The cold makes your teeth chatter, but it's the fear that shakes your whole body. You wish for another flame to push the darkness back, but none comes, and when at last you collapse into exhausted sleep, you know the dreams will still carry lurking figures. The cold night doesn't only test the body, it plants seeds of fear, memories you'll carry, even grown, as both bitter and strangely tender. You see the old woman sitting by the hearth, her back bent, her hands trembling over each bead of her rosary. In the winter night, her shiver isn't just from frost, but from memories pressing in, shards of the past crowding her mind. She tells you of winters before, when the village starved worse than now, when families survived only on roots dug from snow. Her voice is hoarse, but each word drifts like a rotten plank from the past, floating on the frozen sea of the present. You listen as she speaks, and her tired eyes suddenly gleam with a strange light. At times, she laughs, remembering when children used to curl together in the livestock pen, clinging to the animals for warmth. At other times, her voice sinks, recalling those who collapsed in the cold, leaving behind houses that froze into silence. Her memories are a curious mix sorrow and pride, as if every hardship has been turned into proof that they survived. A critic might say she's the narrator character, both an archive and a mirror for the generations that follow. You inhale, the sharp bite of wood smoke filling your nose, her voice mingling with the crackle of burning logs. The cold seems to retreat a little, giving way to a strange warmth radiating from memory. You realize that while children shiver at shadows, the old have their own weapon memory, because memory is both a wound and an invisible coat, shielding them from shattering in the frost. You watch her, seeing both fragility and resolve, and you understand that once her story ends, the wind will howl again, the darkness will thicken again. At that moment, people will reach for other kinds of belief to fight back against the cold knocking at every door. You notice a small hemp pouch hanging at your mother's neck, stuffed with dried herbs. People say it wards off cold, sickness, even the spirits wandering in the night. In the corner, sprigs of mugwort hang upside down, their acrid scent blending faintly with the smoke. You breathe it in, not feeling warmer, but calmer, as if that smell were a blanket woven from nothing but faith. in scarcity. Anything that sparks belief becomes a weapon. The old woman carefully burns a bundle of herbs, the smoke stinging your eyes. Yet everyone believes it drives out the cold hiding in the corners. You watch the thin spirals rise and wonder, does the cold truly fear this smoke? Or do people simply need a reason to cling to? Any outside commentator might scoff. This is a theater of incense psychology, not physics. But for you, in a night that slices skin, even a trick of the mind feels as precious as gold. You touch the little charm pouch, its rough fabric scraping your skin, stirring a strange comfort, as if just having it could keep you from being crushed by the cold in your sleep, in your chest. Fear softens, replaced by the sense of being guarded, even though your reason knows nothing has really changed. And that is the odd power of belief. It doesn't need proof, only presence. You realize that in the cold night, humans always need something to hold on to memory. Prayer, or just a scorched pinch of herbs. And when the smoke fades, the darkness folds back in. That's when your exhausted body pulls you into an old rhythm segmented sleep. That strange medieval habit for enduring the long winter nights. You drift off, but not until morning. People of the Middle Ages often followed the pattern of first sleep, waking in the middle of the night before sinking into a second sleep. And so do you. Your eyes snap open in the clay hut's pitch black, hearing only the wind hissing outside and the soft snores around you. This moment is both strange and familiar, like a pause in a film, where the plot halts so the character can simply breathe. You sit up, feeling the cold slip right down your collar. In the dark, the adults whisper sometimes prayers, sometimes quiet calculations of what tomorrow might demand to keep surviving. The children rub their eyes, scratch their heads, then curl back into sleep, unbothered by the world outside. The night splits in two, like this, leaving people both shivering and strangely given a pause, a pocket of time to rearrange fears and faith. If someone were watching, they might smirk bitterly. Even sleep itself gets fractured by winter. You breathe in, catching the lingering smoke, the mustiness of the blanket, the faint sourness of sweat, familiar smells that, instead of disgust, bring you comfort proof that life still lingers beside you. The night hasn't swallowed everything yet. You rest your head again, letting yourself slip into the second stretch of sleep. And in this one, you're not only reaching for warmth, but for a touch of dreaming, a sliver of forgetting. But just before your eyes close, you catch the flicker of fire in the hearth. That little flame, to people long ago, was nothing less than a god, a fragile anchor where the whole family pinned its hopes through the endless, freezing night. You open your eyes again and realize the whole house seems to revolve around one single point, the fire. It flickers weakly, glowing red against the dark. Yet to everyone, it isn't just an object. It feels like a tiny Ba presiding over the room. Your father whispers a few prayers. Your mother quietly adds another stick of wood, and the children huddle close, staring as if the flame could hear and answer them. In the heavy cold, that belief turns into warmth, not only for the skin, but for the heart itself. You see each pair of eyes shining in the firelight, blurred by smoke, yet sparkling as if just blessed. The fire crackles softly, a small sound, but steady enough to calm everyone, like a heartbeat holding rhythm amid chaos. If someone were to comment, they'd nod knowingly. This is the most important role of winter. The fire isn't a prop. It's the lead character. And you feel it too if the gods sit too far away. Then the fire itself becomes their messenger, bringing the illusion of protection. The smoke stings your eyes, sharp and acrid, but no one pulls away. Instead, they breathe it in deeply, as though it carries the power to drive away spirits and sickness. You stretch out your hands, holding them closer, feeling the sting of heat on your skin, and it feels like relief. In that moment, you believe as long as the fire still burns, the night cannot swallow everything. You sit quietly, watching the light ripple across your family's faces, and understand that every stick of wood thrown into the flames is like another prayer. Then, amid the whispers, someone begins humming a lullaby, soft and wavering. The melody threads itself with the crackle of fire, and the room shifts into something else, a space where music steps in to soften the cold. You hear the song begin. At first, so faint, it seems afraid the wind outside might swallow it. Then, gradually clearer, steadier. It isn't a cheerful tune, but a lullaby tinged with sadness, sung in a raspy voice that fills the clay house. The children's eyes grow heavy. The adults nod gently in rhythm, and you let your own body drift with the melody. In the frozen night, music suddenly becomes an invisible blanket, wrapping the whole family into a single, shared breath. A wooden flute joins in, wavering, unsteady from fingers stiff with cold. Yet it makes the space feel strangely enchanted. You imagine the notes circling the fire, coaxing the flames to dance along. If someone were commenting, they'd say, "This is the scene the director slipped in so the audience wouldn't drown too long in tragedy." And truly, even clumsy as it is, the tune offers a moment of ease within the heavy winter. You smell smoke clinging to your hair, hear the soft snores of children layering over the music, and find yourself smiling. These sounds together feel like an improvised harmony, the cold beating out the drum line, while people struggle to add melody to their lives. The song can't banish the chill, but at least it lets everyone believe the cold hasn't fully won. And when the lullaby fades, you still feel its echo lingering in your chest, warmer than the tattered blanket on your shoulders. But almost immediately, the wind surges through the cracks in the door again, a sharp reminder that outside, darker stories continue. People whisper about the next village over where winter has already claimed a dozen lives to hunger and frost. You sit by the dying fire, listening as your father quietly tells the story of the neighboring village. People say this winter has already swallowed a dozen lives there, from children to the elderly. Not by sword or plague, but simply because hunger and cold had joined forces like a ruthless alliance. You picture the empty houses, thatched roofs sagging under snow, doors sealed tight, an entire village turned into a graveyard without markers. You shiver. The story isn't told with tears, but in a flat, matter-of-fact tone, like a warning. The teller doesn't embellish, doesn't need to. The reality itself is chilling enough. If someone were watching from the outside, they'd say, "This isn't fiction. It's the rawest documentary scene, where truth alone haunts." And because of that truth, everyone in the house falls silent, listening with their hearts clenched. The smoke in the hearth grows harsher, carrying with it a smell that feels like morning. You notice your mother's eyes sink, her arms pulling the younger child closer, as if afraid that letting go even for a second might mean losing them to the night. That kind of fear doesn't need to shout. It creeps in through whispered stories, enough to make everyone bow their heads in prayer. And you begin to understand winter doesn't only kill with the cold you feel on your skin. It also plants terror through the tales that spread from mouth to mouth. And as those fears pile up, people start to believe that outside It isn't just hunger and frost. It's wandering souls, unburied and restless, drifting across the snow-covered fields. You hear people whisper out on the snowfields. Shadows wander at night. They say they're the ones who froze to death, unable to find their way to rest. Whenever the wind howls through the cracks in the door, folks believe it's the moaning of lost souls begging for shelter. You lie wrapped in your torn blanket, those words raising every hair on your skin, because now the cold doesn't just come from your flesh, but from imagination itself, turning the night into a vast graveyard. An old woman swears she saw a white figure standing at the edge of the forest, silent, as if waiting to be called. A child mumbles in half-sleep that someone touched them while they dreamed. These scattered fragments, like spices tossed into a meager meal, thicken the fear of winter nights. If an outsider overheard, they might sneer. Just tricks of the mind in the freezing wind. But to you, when your breath turns so heavy, it clouds the air until faces blur. The line between real and unreal becomes terrifyingly thin. You inhale the smell of smoke and damp wool tangled together, but even that can't smother the feeling that someone sits close by. The darkness twists every sound into a ghost's whisper, the creak of a door, the cry of a cat. Even the soft thud of snow becomes a signal from the other side. The cold feels like an invisible hand brushing your neck, pulling you tighter into your blanket. You close your eyes, praying morning comes quickly. But even in fear, a strange thought slips in if wandering souls really linger. At least they are proof that humans are not completely alone. And it is that uneasy mix of belief and fear that keeps the small fire in your heart alive, waiting for a miracle called spring. You open your eyes after a long, heavy night, and the whole house is hushed. It seems people have run out of words, run out of strength to even be afraid. Yet in their weary eyes, there's still a faint glimmer, fragile, weak, but unmistakably hope. People tell one another spring will come. No one knows exactly when, only that the turning of the earth has never once failed. And in that cold kitchen, the mere thought of green buds is enough to carry everyone through one more night. You hear your father whisper, "Just make it through this month," and your mother holds the children tighter, as if her arms could bridge the whole family into another season. You wonder, maybe survival isn't just bread, wood, and fire. Maybe it's this fragile belief itself. If someone were watching, they'd admit this scene is strange. Nothing happens except patience. Yet you can't look away, because patience itself has become the drama. You breathe in, the stale smoke and damp still heavy in the air. But in your mind, you smell fresh grass, damp soil, the sweetness of thaw. It's absurd the harsher the winter, the sweeter the dream of spring. And it's this very contrast that keeps people from breaking completely. You lie back down, eyes fixed on the cracked clay wall, imagining a green sprout breaking through the fissure, small, but brighter than the flickering candle. And you know, no one truly believes a miracle will happen tomorrow morning. But as long as there's hope, even if it's only a dream of a sprout, the night can be endured once more. You open your eyes into a different kind of night, quieter, lighter, as if the cold itself has grown tired. The wind no longer slices through the cracks like knives. It only murmurs in the distance. You pull the blanket up, your chest tight with anticipation. Could this be the final night of winter? They say if you can survive this one, tomorrow there will be sprouts, damp earth, the scent of new grass. That belief fills every breath, and the whole house trembles with expectant waiting. You sit up, watching the small fire still flicker. The smoke rises thin, no longer thick as in months before. Your father murmurs a prayer. Your mother smiles faintly, and the children sleep more deeply than usual, as if even their dreams feel the cold loosening. Its grip has weakened. The family huddles close, each knowing their strength is nearly gone, but still pouring the last of it into hope, like actors in the final scene, giving everything to close the act. You breathe in and notice the air has changed. It's no longer just smoke and dampness. There's a faint scent of wet earth. You imagine the snow outside has started to melt, each drop falling from the thatched roof, tapping like a drumbeat, announcing a new season. If someone were narrating this, they'd probably say, "This is the moment of release, when the tension eases so the audience can finally breathe." And you feel your own breath soften, even if tomorrow still holds uncertainty. You lie down, close your eyes. In your mind, you've already painted the morning, the pale sun rising, green shoots breaking through, birds returning to the fields. Maybe it's only a dream, but it's strong enough to carry you through this final night. And you realize, even if winter comes back next year, tonight itself is a victory. a closing scene that opens the door to the next chapter of life. You sit quietly, looking back on the winter as if you were a viewer summing up a long, drawn-out film. Nobles, monks, peasants, 3 groups, 3 separate storylines, yet all of them trapped by the cold. The nobles have their fireplaces, their strong wine, but even wrapped in thick furs, they still feel the chill seeping through the heavy stone walls. The monks in the monastery can lean on beer, on prayers, on handwritten books, but they too can't escape the frost that clumps their ink and makes their fingers shake. And you, the peasant, have nothing but a ragged blanket and the breath of the people around you. 3 panels of one painting, each with its own role, but all set against the same white backdrop of snow. You sit quietly, and once again reflect on winter as though closing the credits of a many-part film. Nobles, monks, peasants, 3 different scripts, yet the same enemy circling them all. Nobles shielded by fire and wine, monks clinging to discipline and faith, peasants surviving on scraps and shared warmth. Different roles, but one stage, one endless sheet of white snow. If someone were watching from the outside, they'd probably say, "This is the comparison scene," meant to show that the cold doesn't care about status. And it's true, the difference lies only in how people respond. Nobles turn winter into an excuse for gathering and showing off their luxury. Monks turn it into a spiritual test, a chance for prayer and discipline. Peasants turn it into a daily haunting, where every meal and every night's sleep feels like a survival battle. You breathe in and notice the distinct scents, the sharp smell of burning wood in the castle, the yeasty tang of fermenting beer in the monastery, the heavy damp smoke inside a clay hut. These scents never blend, yet together they tell the same truth no matter the rank. No one escapes the grip of winter. You realize the cold isn't just an enemy, it's a force that pushes people to create. When snow covers the fields, people figure out how to dry meat, salt fish, and make cheese so it lasts through the season. When water freezes solid in jars, they bury wine and food underground, where the temperature stays steady. None of this came from leisure or desire. It came from the urgent truth that if they didn't invent something, the cold would wipe out whole families. Winter, in this way, became a harsh scriptwriter, forcing its characters to improvise just to survive. You hear stories of houses built with thicker walls and lower roofs to trap warmth, clothes stitched in layers, patched with fur, straw, scraps of wool, winter meals changed to thin soups, boiled turnips, dishes that seemed poor, but later became the backbone of European cuisine. If someone were narrating, they'd nod and say, "This is the behind-the-scenes sequence, adversity giving birth to invention." You breathe in again, and in your imagination, you smell sharp cheese, smoked meat mingled with wood smoke. These smells aren't just food. They're proof that people learned how to turn weakness into resistance. The harsher the cold, the sharper the ingenuity. And you understand from these poor kitchens, from these survival habits, an entire culture began to take shape. You breathe out, and it feels like a reminder that even in shivering, people can still create. You realize the cold doesn't just leave its mark on skin and bone. It carves itself deep into collective memory. Stories of brutal winters are passed down like tragic chapters in a history book that never closes. Around the hearth, tales are spun of travelers swallowed by blizzards, of villages losing half their people to frost. Over time, these memories hardened into folklore, into lullabies, into warnings whispered to children, "Be good, or winter will come, take you away." In this way, cold crossed the line from reality into myth. You listen to your grandmother's stories, and you see how fear was wrapped into images, wandering spirits, pale figures in the forest. Children tremble, but still beg to hear more. Adults nod slowly, treating it as shared memory that must be preserved. If an outsider were watching, they might say, "This is the flashback scene where personal memory becomes a story for the whole community." You inhale, smoke stings your nose, but in your mind, what lingers is the smell of memory, a scent that never fades, even when winter has passed. Sad songs, frightening tales, quiet lullabies, all weave into one long score, reminding people that cold is not just weather, but part of identity. You exhale, seeing clearly how collective memory clings to winter, refusing to let it vanish with the snow. You come to understand that the cold has never only tested individuals or villages. It slowly became the thread weaving Europe's character together. From harsh winters, people learned to gather close, to share, to stand against the dark as one. In monasteries, cold became discipline and faith. In castles, it forced nobles to build thick walls and giant hearths, shaping lives of ceremony and enclosure. In villages, it bound peasants together, shaping a spirit of community that could not be separated. In this way, cold became the invisible glue that held society tight. You see that from the thin soups, from the lullabies sung on freezing nights, to the prayers whispered in snow-covered churches. Each piece helped shape what became the European character: patient, resilient, grounded in the power of community, and holding on to a faith that goes beyond reason. If there were an audience looking on, they'd probably say, "This is the foundation scene, the moment where hardship becomes identity." And it's true. The cold itself molded a spirit that was both tough and deeply faithful. You breathe in, and it almost feels like you can smell the damp wool, the smoke, the snowy earth scents woven into that collective memory. They're not random details anymore, but the perfume of history, a signature fragrance that can't be mistaken. And as you breathe out, you realize it was through those endless, freezing nights that people here learned to find warmth in one another, turning hardship into the root of shared strength. And yet, even when faith and identity had taken shape, the story still needs an echo to close, because in the end, spring has returned, but the cold remains etched in the heart like an open-ended question without those winters. Would people have ever learned to cherish warmth this much? You breathe out, and this time, no white clouds of frozen breath rise the way they did on past nights. The air feels lighter, softer, yet in your chest you still carry the weight of stepping out of a collective nightmare. Spring is here. The buds are breaking through, but the biting cold, the gnawing hunger, the rasping coughs in the dark, all of it is still carved into memory. You know the aftertaste of winter won't melt away as quickly as snow in the fields. It will follow you, become story, become legacy. You look around and see people laughing more, walking with lighter steps, but in their eyes, there's still that glimmer of exhaustion, as if everyone understands they've just survived a brutal test. If an outsider were to comment, they'd probably say, "This is the closing scene, but not a neat, happy ending. It's an open ending, meant to linger with the audience as they leave the theater." Because truly, the cold didn't just make people shiver. It taught them to treasure every sip of warm water, every meal, every touch of another hand. You breathe in and catch the scent of fresh earth rising as the ice melts, mingling with the faint smoke of a dying fire. Two scents woven together like the meeting point of two seasons. And you realize the biggest question still lingers Without those brutal winter nights, would people have learned resilience? Would they have drawn so close to one another? A question that doesn't need an answer, because life itself has already answered it. You exhale, this time lighter, freer. The cold night has retreated, but it still echoes inside you like a lingering soundtrack. And you understand that echo, even when it is frigid, is what teaches people the true meaning of warmth. And so, as you sit here with that thought, you realize the story of winter isn't just about survival. It's about finding warmth in one another, about carrying the echo of the cold so that the glow of comfort feels even brighter. Every breath you take now is a quiet reminder you made it through the night, and the promise of tomorrow is waiting. So let yourself rest. Let your body sink deeper into the softness beneath you, and let your mind drift far from the frost and into gentler dreams. You're safe, you're warm, and you've carried enough for today. Good night, dear one. May your sleep be deep. May your heart be light. And may you wake to a morning filled with calm and quiet joy. Sweet dreams.